Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 72nd episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your replacement host, Travis McDaniel, filling in for Roger Bodie, and I'm joined, as always, with his best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, which hero from Bright Lights do you most align with morale-wise?
Morale-wise, oh gosh, I don't know if I actually.
Because they all have like their own little.
I don't know what their morals are. I don't.
Okay, well, you got Teklevasen. He's out here, progress at any cost, building up mech suits with wanton abandon, making deals with demons or something, and becoming shadow mechs. You got Max, who's trying to burn down the establishment. You know, really bringing back punk rock in the year, whatever it is, and metrics. And you got Dash, who's just like, play items, I guess.
Okay, definitely Dash, if those are how they're going to be described. I'm like, I don't know, I'll play some items, I guess. I don't need to do some dark, sinister research or like burn down all the establishments. I'm just kind of like, I'm just chilling. I'll just put some items into play, put some counters on my symbiosis shot, just have a good time, you know?
Sounds good. Honestly, I think just putting a bunch of items into play, who doesn't want to do that?
Yeah, you got so much stuff. And I have definitely had a lot of things in my life. I'm not the best at getting stuff away. It's something that I like constantly have to make a very focused effort on, like trimming all the excess out of my life because I have so much random just crap that ends up sitting around in my room and around the house. So yeah, play some items.
Nothing about that. I'm here this week for you folks listening at home to fill in for Roger. He had a family emergency kind of pop up and he had to head over to Cleveland. And I'm here to keep the show going on and to provide you guys with excellent content. So hopefully I can live up to Roger's legacy. I even brought the mug. So we're going to keep going. And today we're talking about Bright Lights, very specifically the limited perspective of it, as we go over pre-release weekend and how we're looking forward to the draft format. Michael, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, before we jump into the Bright Light stuff, I kind of want to take a second to introduce you to the people that may not know who you are, Travis. So Travis has been mine and Roger's friend for like 2-ish years since the calling
Not as long as I've been
with
playing
Starvo
Fab.
in Indianapolis is when we basically met you. You crashed at my house. We hung out a bunch that weekend. Right? That was that time?
It was like spring last year. It was like February, right? Of 2022?
Yeah, February of 2022. And we grinded Starvo v Prism.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Before the tournament, and we hung out, we got pizza. It was a good time. But so Travis has been my friend since then. We've tested a lot together. You helped me work on the Ice Ender deck before Nationals, and then earlier this year, you became a member of the Wolfpack, which is awesome, and you've been great as part of the team.
Thank you. I'm glad to be there, and everyone's great as part of the team, honestly. So
yeah,
I'm a good among greats in my mind.
And then most of our viewers probably know you for editing the podcast. Now they can kind of put a face to whenever we say Travis is going to do something for us, or good thanks to Travis for doing this thing. And yeah, Travis is our editor.
I try to be pretty active in the Discord too.
Oh yeah, that's true. And then there was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah, we also teamed with you at the team tournament, the Team Sealed Outsiders Battle Hardened thing, wherever that was.
Yeah, and that coverage was awesome. And thank you to Savage Feats and Mansant and the whole crew for putting that together. I think that was one of the single best pieces of Flesh and Blood coverage that's been done to date, and there's been a lot of really good Flesh and Blood coverage, so that really should speak highly of the content. Definitely check it out on their YouTube channel. I believe it is just Savage Feats on YouTube. And thankfully, that team event went much better than our first team event together back at the Calling Indianapolis.
Yeah, so the first
where we had all never played Blitz.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you tell it.
The first time we met, we were like, well, we're not doing anything this Friday because you came down the Friday. Me and Roger were going to go to the convention center anyway. And we all went and played a team Blitz event. And none of us had played any Blitz.
And I only had just known you.
Yeah, yeah. None of us had played like any blitz before that. I think we went 1 and 2, and then Roger left. He was just like, "I'm out," and that was it.
I think that sounds right.
it was it was could have been a better introduction, but I'm glad everything worked out and we're buddies now. So
Me too. I remember that event very distinctly because like I had learned the game probably the hardest way possible. I learned the game playing Lexi back then because I saw the card three of a kind. I was like, oh, there's no way this card isn't good. Uh, People hadn't really solved Lexi back then, and she was probably a little weaker in the meta back then. There was a lot of powerful things going on in the old Prism Chain Starvo days. And the other deck I learned was I built Kano and Blitz, and I was like, oh, I like being a wizard. I like blowing stuff up. And so I had played like 3 Blitz events with Kano, and I was like, I could play Kano in a team event. And then I ended up getting fatigued by an Oldhim because I left like a third of my deck at the last table and didn't even realize it until I was like, why am I on second cycle already?
yeah,
Kind
oops.
of deal. So,
Oh well.
and then and Michael, you were just like, I don't know what everyone's problem is. I'm just playing Oldhim and I'm killing people.
Yeah, it was the same as CC Oldhim. I don't know. You
And
just
so
block, you pulse reacts, you swing your winners well. It was a good time. But anyway,
yeah, uh,
let's
that
go.
was fun. But yeah, let's get on to topic.
Yeah. So Bright Lights Limited. You did 1 pre-release, 2 pre-releases.
I only got to do one. I had an accident the Friday before. I normally wear glasses for those of you who have seen me at events. My glasses took one for the team, so to speak. And so I needed to schedule an eye exam pretty quick, and that lined up. Pretty much the only time I could do that was during my second pre-release, and so I had to pretty much skip that. Funny enough, like they were actually getting started by the time I was done, so I could have joined, but I had already like had other obligations set up. So a bit unfortunate there, but I did play one pre-release, and I got to play 2 decks because I actually switched heroes after the first round. So I kind of have a good feel of probably the first, like the 2 probably most commonly played heroes of the format, which I think would be Teklovasin and Max. Uh, but I went undefeated in my pre-release up until the finals, where I lost Teklovasin Mirror to our other teammate, Brian, who was playing just quite frankly probably a little bit more of a strong deck. He had a couple more of the payoffs that Teklovasin's looking for, and he got started faster than me. He got his 4 evos before I even got my third, so I started to fall behind really really quick.
Yeah, it's tough when their deck is better than you and they draw better than you. It makes it tough.
Yeah, it makes it really really hard.
But yeah, Brian's also a very good player too, so no shame in losing to him. I actually ended up doing 2 pre-releases over the weekend. I wasn't sure if I was going to do any, and then there was one that was 10 minutes from my house that wasn't full, and I set aside time on Sunday to do that. And then Saturday at like noon, I was like, what am I going to do with my day? And I'm like, I could go pre-release. I look online, and there's one like half an hour away. I called and made sure there would be space for me, and I ended up driving out there. And there ended up being only 3 people at that pre-release, so I'm glad I went, so it wasn't 2. But we basically just got to open some packs and play against each other. I played Teklovasin in that. I had 5 evos, 1 of each slot, and then 2, I think it was chess pieces. But I also had the majestic chess piece, the base one that blocks 3 then and has temper. So that was really strong. I think my deck was very good there. I had like around 30 something 3 blocks, and I just kind of pretty easily. I don't even know if it was fatigue. It was like fatigue by damage. Both my opponents playing Teklovasin, where I was just like blocking a little bit, hitting them, equipping some things, and yeah, I just outvalued both of them and won the 2 rounds I got to play of that because we only had 3 players. And then I did another one the next day where I had a pool that had 2 evos, both were hats, or it might have been 3 evos, all 3 were hats. They were all hats though, and I was like, we're not playing Teklovasin. We can't play the Teklovasin weapon. And I looked at my pool, and I think I had a pretty solid dash pool. I had 2 red boom grenades, and I had a few different blue items, but the one that stood out to me as being pretty good is the one that you can sacrifice to get back a blue from your discard. And it has crank.
Oh,
It's like a
Like the backup protocol
yeah,
blue or
backup
something.
protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that item seemed pretty good. And then I also had the healing thing that goes back in your deck when you use it, which I'm not convinced that's good, but it did allow me to fatigue a max in the final round, who I knew had.
I'm also not convinced that's good.
I knew they had maximum velocity, and I would have trouble racing him. We played 3 rounds. The event was going to be 3 rounds, and we played for fun afterwards. And then they were like, actually, since we don't know who's undefeated because we were both 3-0 at that point, we're going to play another round if everyone's okay with that. So he beat me up with maximum velocity, and then they're like, well, in the middle of the game, they're like, we're going to play another round, and we had already kind of, or we kind of talked about it there, and we're like, okay, this shouldn't count because we were both playing like expecting that we'd have or expecting that it wasn't for anything. So we basically finished that game where I died at the maximum velocity, and then I get to sideboard for our actual game, and I kind of changed my plan a little bit with the intent to fatigue him because I don't think I can really race maximum velocity stuff. So I cut a couple of no block items that the amplifier, I can't remember what it's called. It's 1 cost at red. It gives advantage with 4 steam counters, and it gives your next boost card.
Yeah, that's Ward.
No,
Oh no, that one. That's the I don't remember what it's called now either.
Yeah, so I kind of read in a yellow one of that for a couple 3 blocks, and just plan to lean towards fatigue if the game ended up in a place where I could, and I ended up fatiguing him and winning the pre-release. So
it's called Hadron Collider, by the way.
Hadron Collider, yes, that thing. Yeah, overall, I think the format is pretty interesting. The weapons ended up all being better than I thought they were going to be. Like Max's bonk, what's it called? The bonker.
Banksy.
Yeah, Banksy
Yeah.
ended up being better than I thought it was. Dash's pistol is very good when you enable it. It's just 0 resources for 2 damage. Is 0 resources and an action point for 2 damage. It's just like a good rate. And then Teklovasin, once you get 3 or 4 evos, his weapon is extremely good. So
yeah, he has probably the best weapon once you've got it going. But he's also got the only infinite weapon, which is something of relevancy somewhat in sealed, I guess.
Yeah.
Before we jump like too deep into like the heroes in sealed like specifics, I actually wanted to ask you how you felt the community sentiment around this set was, particularly from from all perspectives, from classic constructed to sealed to limited. Did you have any people did any thoughts really stand out to you?
Yeah, so I think at the pre-release, it seemed like everyone was having a good time. It seemed like everyone was enjoying the format. The 4 packs making a deck, and the way the heroes all played was like, I don't know, it seemed like there was a lot of excitement and people thought it was pretty cool. But then I come home and look at Twitter, and Twitter seems like all doom and gloom, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. No one's even drafted the format yet. Like the sealed, like Flesh and Blood is not known for its great sealed experiences. So I love Flesh and Blood. I just don't think the game is designed for sealed, or like the sets aren't designed for sealed. I think the game actually is a very good game for sealed, and I think if they focused on balancing on sealed, we'd have some very, very good sealed formats, because of just like, it's very interesting looking at your pool, deciding what hero to play. But the fact that most set formats are, some heroes need more synergy pieces than others, which works really well in draft, but a lot of the time they just fall short in sealed, leads to sealed being pretty underwhelming, where most people just end up playing the heroes that are most capable of just putting the good cards in their deck, and not really a synergy based. That's why we saw Assassins do the best in Outsiders. We saw Fi be the best in Uprising. And here we see, I think Teklovasin is probably the best hero in the sealed format by a reasonable amount. And you can argue he has some synergy where you're just trying to get evos of different slots, but that's just like, if your sealed pool has 4 different slots of evos, you should probably be playing Teklovasin.
Yeah, I think just about every sealed format I've played in this game has come down to whatever hero best uses what I like to call block 3 soup, which is what you do when you just put all the block 3s in your deck, and then whatever the rest of your sealed pool that is remotely playable is, and then you just play good old value blood, and hopefully you outvalue blood your opponent.
Yeah, having a good weapon has historically been very good in sealed too, because like you look at Fi had the best weapon in that format. You look at The assassins, you could argue their weapons are worse than Kodachi's, which I think is actually just correct. Their weapons are worse than Kodachi's, but when you can't fill your deck with all the zero cost blues you need to take advantage of Kodachi's because you're playing sealed and not draft, then that kind of becomes more questionable. And then Tekla definitely has the most reliable weapon in sealed if you're doing the thing. Though I guess everyone can play as weapon, but if you're going to be playing a bunch of Evos, you probably want to be playing Tekla.
Yeah, because you just get redundancy with being able to actually get your weapon online. So like if you want to play a boost attack, you can boost without needing to worry about boosting the thing that turns your weapon into a real card. Plus, like you get extra value for doing it that way too. So it just generally makes sense. Um, yeah.
I
So maybe one day, I would say like my impression of the set was that uh, I wasn't surprised or necessarily disappointed, but I was kind of hoping that the set would be a little more on the sealed side of things, and I think it maybe is a little better than previous sealed formats because I think like a good max deck can definitely get there. Dash, I don't know. You have to like really get the correct pool to make her work. I think so. I think all my pre-releases, most players immediately were playing Max, and both of the pre-releases that I had asked some of our teammates about, the majority of players were playing Max. But the finals were all Teklovasan. So it just seems like uh, he's got the highest floor. And that's sort of just the thing with sealed in general, as because there's so many block threes usually in a lot of these sets, and you open so many packs, you're going to have a lot more block threes than you might see in a draft deck because there's more like personal packs per player. But also because there's no synergies, the actual like ceiling offensively is lower. So you kind of have this thing where like blocking is better, attacking is usually a little worse. So that's where you kind of get the value soup sort of better weapon wins games kind of deal.
yeah.
At least that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I agree. Block threes are just like so good when the format doesn't have the offensive synergies that let you go like notably above rate, and it's hard to get those in
Yeah, it's
sealed.
just really hard.
So
Yeah, like you just don't if you don't open a bunch of above rate stuff, you can't really go above rate. You're just kind of hoping that you can grind your opponent out usually.
I'm kind of jumping forward a little bit, and I did get to play one draft, and that felt notably different. We were very frequently going above rate.
That's good. Because that's what I was hoping it would be. Is that draft would make a lot more sense
Mm-hmm.
for the other two heroes to really break out a little more. Before we jump into that, though, do you want to go over the heroes really quick and sealed and kind of like how you felt they were, or do you
Yeah.
think like we've kind of already hit the hammer on the head?
Now let's go through them
Okay.
all.
Well, we can start with Teklevossen.
So Teglavostin, like we were kind of alluding to earlier, you want to get all the evos out to kind of power up your gun. The gun, when it's fully powered, one resource for 3 damage go again. That's just 2 points above rate. That's great. That's exactly where you want to be. Spending one resource for 3 damage with go again is awesome. And even if you're going minus a little bit while you're playing these evos out, because you aren't playing them from banish, you're just playing them from your hand or something like that, it's still very quickly pays for itself and the upgrades you're getting to your gun. On top of that, the gun also like it makes you the most capable of fatiguing other players because you're not spending any cards for your deck when you fire it, and it has go again too, so you can even follow it up with other things. So I think Teklavastin is also probably the most intuitive to play. I think Dash and Max have some pretty weird lines. I think Max has like really, this is jumping a little bit. Max has some really interesting sequencing to make sure you're maximizing all your hyperdrivers and getting your Banksy value on the turns that you can. Whereas Teklevasen, the turns are a little bit simpler and it's more about your like overarching game plan and making sure you have a solid deck and a solid game plan rather than like making sure you're getting all the sequencing decisions right on each individual turn.
Um, there's a little bit there with like maximizing the value of your evos. So it's like you rarely want to play them from hand. That's usually not a good value proposition, but uh, that's it's like a minor part of it. But I do agree that I think Max has more intricate lines, especially in sealed. And Dash is probably going to be the hardest deck to solve. She really has big Icelander of the format vibes, where when people have figured out like sort of like the code of like what Dash wants into like a good limited deck, kind of jumping into draft, I think she will be quite strong. But until that point, I think she will underperform or be underdrafted. Uh, especially because I think in sealed as well, since a lot of people kind of correlate their sealed experience to their first draft experience. Uh, I don't think dash is super duper strong in sealed unless you just open like a really crazy pool. There's usually um, reasons to pull you towards one of the other two heroes. And also starting with lower life, you have to kind of overcome that difference to make dash worthwhile. That's my impression anyway.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up similar to what I think was right for Tales of Aria, where the majority of the time, like more than half, you should be one hero. And that set it was Briar, and the set it was Teklevossen. And then like a decent chunk of the rest of the time, you should be the second best hero, which in again Tales of Aria was Oldheim, and in this format was is Dash. And then like occasionally you're going to pull the sick pool that lets you play Lexi or Dash, but I think that it won't be super often.
Yeah. And then max in this format, because it was so grindy, unless you just have a maximum velocity or some way to really go way over. I've heard tales of people using what's the keyword? Overpower? Is it overpower? To
Overpower.
like
Yep.
pseudo dominate? Yeah. With like pump cards and setting that up against people to just like go over the top and leak damage through. Um, if you don't pull those pieces, I think it's really hard to perform as max. And as long as you have at least like one or two Evo slots, I think you're better off playing Teklevossen. Even if you can never get the gun fully online, you still have an infinite weapon, and you can again just try to outvalue your opponents. Um, but Max in this format felt like he needed to really maximize his cards in deck, which meant most of the time you're only boosting once per turn, so that you kind of make up the banish cost from your deck, the losing one card there, with being able to swing Banksy. So you still got 3 value out of that card you random banished. And then the way that you go over the top again is usually going to be the pump cards because they're on rate damage with go again. That doesn't cost you cards from deck to like actually play.
Yeah, some of Max's pump cards are kind of crazy. There's one that is 1 for 4 with Go Again that also puts a counter on a hyperdriver. So it's basically like the
Yes.
hyperdriver counter is going to give you back a resource. So that's kind of like a 0 for 4 because you're going to get a resource back at some
Yeah,
point
that
from
card
that.
is recharge, by
Yeah,
the way. I
recharge.
believe it's called recharge.
Um,
Yeah.
there's another one that costs 2 at base. I think it's Quickfire that is reduced by 1 for each hyperdriver you have. It can be pretty hard to get 2
Mm-hmm.
hyperdrivers in play, but when you do, it's just a 0 for 4 also, which is also very good. So
I think it's like the highest risk, highest upside one.
yeah, and then there's the generic that's or it's not generic. It's just doesn't have any hyperdriver synergies. It's just 1 resource for +4. Giga something
Gigawatt.
gigawatt. I think that's the worst of the
Or
three. And then
that card's very clearly an homage to Back to the Future too, because it's got that Doc Brown like art and the 1.21 gigawatts. I don't think you would even get that reference, but
no.
given your propensity for movies in the past, but I'm sure Roger would appreciate it. Gigawatt, most importantly, I think also can buff your weapon.
Oh
That is like actually super relevant when it comes to like Banksy. So you can do I guess like it requires an extra resource, but if you already had a hyperdriver in play, you get that resource and it works super well off of blue, where you like boost, you pitch your blue, you crank the hyperdriver, and then you play the gigawatt, and then you Banksy for 7, and it's like really hard to block, and you get the extra value out of the hyperdriver that way.
yeah, the breakpoints on Banksy are very big because anytime you get that 1 resource or that 1 steam counter on your hyperdriver, you're just getting plus an extra resource in the future, which is great. That's means it's basically a 0 cost weapon attack that turn, assuming that when you get the resource later, you can use it. So you're just like storing a
I also got
resource.
to use it in Teklevossen. So you get the attack for 7 go again off of 2 cards and 2 resources.
with
That
the
was pretty
with the
fun.
pistol. Yeah, or
With
not
the
the
leveler.
leveler. Yeah, it's not a pistol. I'm gonna call.
Yeah.
I keep calling all the guns pistols, but none of them are pistols except
But the
Tekla
leveler is,
pistol.
I think the leveler is like a machine gun. It's like a Gatling gun that's like attached to his arm. It's like a huge weapon based on the art.
Yeah.
It's like if that's a pistol, then I don't know.
If it goes pew pew, it's a pistol in my heart. I'm not a gun person.
Okay. 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 Well, unfortunately, the rules say otherwise because you can't use the pistol items with the Tekla leveler. It is a gun. A pistol is not a gun. Uh, there's one other pump too that I think either forgot to mention or glossed over, which is the gas up, which is probably the hardest one to pull off both in sealed and maybe in limited, but it's also the highest upside overall, which is the one that lets you play a hyperdriver from banish. If you draft an actual hyperdriver and get it in banish and then you play this, that card is crazy in terms of a value proposition. Anywhere from like reasonably 5 to a ceiling of 7 for one resource with go again.
Yeah, I think like
So,
especially if you're in max and you can do that, you can also crank that hyperdriver when it enters, which gives you 2 action points, which is like
oh, you absolutely can.
that's something that max isn't normally able to do. Like Dash can kind of make multiple action points by cranking items off the top, but Max really can't do that because the only time he would crank an item is if he spends his action point to play the item for the most part. I guess like there's the item the boost attacks that on hit you can put an item into play that also let you do that, but usually Max isn't going to be doing that. So or isn't going to be. Yeah. So I guess it's not true because yeah, the boost things can hit.
I actually had 2 hyperdrivers in my sealed pool with a gas up, a gigawatt, and a quick fire at red.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I had a recharge at red. It wasn't the quick fire; it was the recharge for sure. And I did actually manage to boost a hyperdriver and play a gas up and put it into play
Okay,
and
that's
crank it. So it felt really good.
mm-hmm. And I think there is a synergy that I was trying to think how you can set up your hyperdriver to get banished because if you're playing gas up and hyperdriver, you really want to banish that hyperdriver to get the +3 on your gas up when you play gas up. 1 for 7 sounds really good. Um, but I think the main way to do that is I think there's a hat that lets you draw a card and put a card from your hand on top of your deck. So you can do that to kind of set up the hyperdriver. That's probably the main way you would do that. But
There's another, which is how I did it, which was to play the hyperdriver. I think I played it out early, and then you can scrap it
oh,
because it's an item. So you
okay.
can just banish it with a scrap card and get it into the banish that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That sounds like something that wouldn't be that hard to do. I forgot about scrapping hyperdrivers. So yeah, gas up very good if you can do the thing.
Yeah. But yeah, there's actually four pumps, and I think in draft they will be pretty important because I think there's not as, I guess maybe Dash doesn't care about them that much, but there. But before we move on to that, what are your overall thoughts on sealed as a format? I know we kind of touched on it already, but just like overall, good format, bad format, meh format. Would you be happy to sit down and play it?
So I I can't give it an amazing review because I think like the best sealed formats will have like some hero diversity. I think if it's right to play one hero 60% of the time, or even 50% of the time in a 3 hero set, that feels like too much to me. And I think it's probably going to be a little bit more than that when you should play Tekla. I think that keeps me from giving it too high of a rating, but the games themselves do feel pretty fun. It feels like you're making a lot of decisions. I got to play Dash in my second pre-release, and Dash is like all your games, you're making a million decisions where like you're trying to figure out how you're going to boost things, how you're going to set things up, crank when you're blocking out, when you're using symbiosis shot. There's like a lot of play-by-play decisions, and then like even just like what you put in your deck is really was pretty hard for me to figure out because like every item you put increases your chance of hitting with dash, but decreases your amount of cards that block basically. And yeah, I think the format it was fun to play, and I think if once it's solved or more solved than it is now, as long as it isn't correct to play Tekla in like 75% of the time, I can't be too hard on it. I think the games were really fun to play, and it feels really like it feels like there's some things to solve about it. What do you think?
I would agree with that for sure. I mean, obviously, we've only played the set for one weekend, and so there's a lot to explore there. I definitely feel like Max definitely has um, some things to explore about him in terms of finding ways. And heck, there probably is a way to play Dash, like where like it's correct to play Dash and Sealed that maybe right now is not super obvious, but comes around there. Because if you ever play an item off the top as Dash, you are just so massively plus on value because you're turning 1 or 2 resources into a whole extra card pretty much, and potentially even an action point. So there's a lot of stuff there to explore and see. I actually, after talking about it here, I'm feeling a little better about it than I was maybe at the beginning of this talk. Uh, I would say this is probably up there for me in terms of sealed formats. Just looking back, I really enjoyed Outsider Sealed, even though it was mostly just your Uzuri pile versus their Uzuri pile. I felt like it was a very rewarding format to play well and navigate the games well, and I feel like it's kind of the same way here. But I also think that I disagree with you where like if one hero is correct only 50% of the time in sealed, this is like the best sealed Flesh and Blood has ever had, basically. Because I feel like it was closer to 80 or 90% in other sealed formats. Like in Outsiders especially, I feel like you should have been playing Assassin at least like 3/4 of the time. And then like a Ranger pile the other 1/4. So I feel like it's pretty high up there as far as Flesh and Blood goes. It's far from perfect because again, this game it just seems like sealed is not necessarily an afterthought, but it's not a priority, and I believe they've said as much. But I'm actually I think warming up to the idea of this sealed format, and honestly, I would sit down and just open 4 packs with a friend and play some sealed games. I don't think I would hate doing that.
Yeah, I think my most played sealed format was Welcome to Wraith. Me and Roger did quite a few Welcome to Wraith sealeds, and I think that it was pretty even split between Katsu, Dorinthia, and Bravo, which hero you should play most of the time. Like Bravo and Dorinthia and Katsu all have very good weapons for their own reasons and all have pretty functional game plans. I think Reinhardt was the least common hero you should play in sealed by like a pretty reasonable amount, but the other three were all like none of them were above 50%. I think they were all three quite good. And that is kind of
That makes
what
sense.
my ideal sealed format is, where like three heroes that you're gonna you aren't leaning a certain way before you start opening your packs. And even though
That's reasonable. I mean, I think that's a totally valid criticism of the format. I didn't play a lot of Welcome to Wraith Sealed. I think I maybe have only played like maybe 1 or 2 rounds of it, and I felt like I pretty much do agree with your assessment. But I've always found like Welcome to Wraith to be a little too milk toast for my taste. Like it's just a little too vanilla.
I
And I
love
mean that
Welcome to
in the,
Wraith.
the most loving way possible because who doesn't love Welcome to Wraith? But I think that that would be a perfect balance to strike again if we can get there. All right, so let's move on to talking about draft as we're a little over 30 minutes into it. I think actually we're making pretty good time. I want to start off by just asking, what do you think are the major changes between sealed and draft for Bright Lights?
So it's definitely not correct to be Tech Lavasan 60 to 75% of the time in draft. Draft is self-correcting. When heroes are overdrafted, then that means all those decks are going to be worse, and all the other decks that want different cards are going to be better. Even though everybody wants the good mechanologist cards, they're still, if everyone's trying to take the Evos, then it's going to be hard to get enough Evos to play a good Tech Lavasan deck. If let's say that this wild situation that 7 of the 8 players are trying to play Teklo, then no, not very many of the players are going to have their 4 Evos to fully level up their Teklo levelers and have a good time. So I think the biggest change is just that Teklo may be the best deck. I'm not sure if he is or isn't, but you definitely shouldn't be playing him nearly as often as you were in sealed.
Yeah. The only 2 drafts I'm aware of, I wasn't a part of any, but they were both 4 Tekla pods with 2 and 2 of the other 2 heroes. And in yours, I believe you went 3-0 with Max, right?
Yeah. So we got a draft on Draft Fab before the shutdown happened. Well, I'll let Roger talk about that one when he gets back if he wants to, but I'm going to leave that one for now. But yeah, so we did a draft on Draft Fab with a few of the Wolfpack guys and a few of the random people from Runaway's Discord. And it ended up being 4 Tekla. I was Max with 2 Tekla on each side of me, and then there was one other Max and 2 Dashes. And the finals of that pod was Max versus Dash. And I think that is going to be pretty common if you see 4-2-2 pods where you just see the 2 heroes that are not Tekla making it to the finals.
Interesting you say that because the other draft, my friend Sebastian, who made the finals of the calling over in, I believe it was the German calling. He was the Uzuri player there. He played a draft, and there was also 4 Tekla 2 Dash and 2 Max, and it was also a Max versus Dash final.
Okay.
And his conclusion was that maybe Tekla not so good when there's 4 of them in the draft.
Yeah,
so Definitely, I think that'll happen a lot early on.
I think the draft can definitely support 3 Tekla-Vossens. I think there are enough Evos for that, especially if the other heroes aren't wanting them at all, which I don't think that's exactly true. I think you are going to want some of them in Dash and Max, but not. You're going to be a lot more selective about which ones you want. Whereas Tekla-Vossen's like, I don't care, give me the Evos. Though he prefers the ones that block, but he'll take any.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I think. Yeah, I don't think I want any of the instants, which are the only ones that don't block.
Well,
So in Tekla anyway.
I think you do want them just because the gun upgrade is worth having a card that literally just says upgrade my gun. And then you're also going to have some of the attacks that care about having your Evos. So I think
That's
like
fair.
you'd rather have a like if it's pack 3, pick 5 or 6 and you see a no block legs and you have no leg Evos, I think you're taking the no block just to like round out your deck if
You're
you're in
probably right.
Boston. So we'll
Yeah,
see how
and
that
if
shapes
you
out.
just like boost it away, you
Yeah,
just boost it away, it's still free, right?
that's true. You get a bunch of value when you boost the zeros.
Do you want to get started on talking about the individual heroes and how we predict their strategy? Or in your case, since you've played one draft, you're basically a master, so you can you can tell us all how it's done.
So I will share my findings from one draft, but I am far from being a master. I have done one draft, and I'm getting a few more in this weekend, and I'm really excited for that. But for now, I've done one. So Tekla-Vossen.
Sure. Do you want to start with Max, or do you want to start with Tekla because you won with Max?
I can start with Max. So Max, with Max, you want a lot of the same cards we talked about in the sealed, like the pumps that synergize with hyperdrivers are very, very good. There's also some boost cards that if you have a hyperdriver in play, they go above rate. I can't remember the names of them, but they basically become throttle and zipper hit if you have a hyperdriver in play, where their cost is reduced by 1.
I believe it's Rev Up and Jumpstart.
That's right.
Rev Up and Jumpstart. Like 99% sure. Yep, that's it.
Those cards are both great.
I got the card list.
Rev Up with a hyperdriver in play is a 2 for 6 that you boost to get go again, and Jumpstart is a 1 for 5 that you boost and it gets go again. And Jumpstart specifically, if you have a single hyperdriver in play, Jumpstart is like kind of the ideal card because you can go Jumpstart and then you can activate Max and crank the hyperdriver that comes out. If you had a hyperdriver, well, you can't play it for 1 if you don't have a hyperdriver. So you pitch a blue, you play Jumpstart, you got into 2 resources floating. Your hyperdriver triggers put you back up to 3 resources. Then you can crank Max and Banks, or use Max to make a hyperdriver, crank it, and attack with Banksy. And that's a 2-card 8. That's 2-card 8's very good. And it costs 2 cards from deck, but that's still 2 points above what they'd get from blocking with 2 cards for 3. So 2-card 8.
Yeah, it's actually a little better, right? Because you get the hyperdriver as well, so it could be a little better than 2-card 8.
Well, you're spending a hyperdriver counter and you're getting a hyperdriver counter, so it's like break even, right? Because you're destroying the
sure,
one.
Yeah, if your Banksy hits, then you're +1.
Oh yeah. It's 8 with an on hit. So yeah, I think that's very powerful. I guess also if you boost away a Big Bertha or Crankshaft.
Yep.
Or Crankshaft, you also get a counter on an extra hyperdriver, which is kind of free value that Max will generate a lot during drafts. So Max actually has a lot of cards that are quite good in his deck because you want the Big Bertha Crankshafts to boost away and buff your hyperdrivers. They're also just fine boost cards on offense. You want the Jumpstart and the Rev Up that get their cost reduced if you have a hyperdriver. And then you want the pumps that synergize with hyperdrivers, either Recharge and all the ones we talked about earlier. Recharge, Gas Up, I think is the hardest.
All
to make
4 of the pumps.
Gigawatt, since now that I know it works with Banksy, that card is going to go up in my pick order a little bit. And then the one that costs less, Quickfire. All 4 of those cards, very good. I don't know what the upper limit on how many you should play is because obviously you need to draw a boost card for them to do anything. Even the one that just boosts Mechanologist attacks, you can only attack with Banksy if you boosted. So you kind of need a boost for all of them, and you also need resources to play them. But they're all quite good when you're doing the thing. And I ended up having 3 of, I'm so bad with names of new cards. 3 of the one that gets its cost reduced. Quick Shot. It's not a Quick Shot.
A quick fire?
Quick fire,
Or are
yeah.
you talking about a different
No,
card?
quick fire. I ended up
Yeah,
having
okay.
3 red quick fires in my
Yeah.
max deck that I 3-0'd with. And most of the time it was still just 1 resource for 4 damage. But I had a couple times where I either hit with a Banksy to get an extra counter on a hyperdriver so I could use Max's ability to make a second hyperdriver, or just randomly had 2 hyperdrivers for some reason. And when it's free, it's just a 0 for 4 with Go Again. That's great. That's very, very strong. So
That's a that's a 0 to 60 right there. That'll get you a ticket.
yeah. So I think Max, you want to focus on all these other cards. Then you just want to fill out the rest of your deck with more red boost cards because you need the critical massive boost cards to do all of the things that you're trying to do. And even yellow and blue boost cards are fine. They all block for 3, and you need to fill out your deck. I attacked with yellow boost cards plenty of times in that 3-0 draft, and yeah, it's just part of what you have to do. And then you also can pitch the yellows. I think they're worse than the reds and blues, but you're pretty happy to have most cards that say boost.
Where would you rate the actual item hyperdriver in a max deck? Do you think that's an important pickup to have 1 or 2 of? Or do you think it's not that important?
It depends how many synergy pieces you have. Like if you have a lot of quick fires, then that can really help you have 2 hyperdrivers in play to make sure you're getting the discount on quick fire. If you have gas up, that's another argument to play it. But ultimately, I think spending a resource and an action point and a card for what is essentially 3 resources is a pretty bad deal. So if you don't have a few synergy pieces, then I would stay away from playing it. You can get an action point back by giving up one of the resources on the hyperdriver, but again, if you aren't doing some very synergistic things with it, I would stay away from it. It also doesn't block, so when you don't want it, you don't really have a choice.
I mostly agree. Being able to just like play it, crank it, and then swing Banksy without spending cards from deck is maybe worth exploring. I also think Expedite and MetX, those 2 cards make it a little more interesting because then those cards you can boost them and then functionally gain 2 action points, so that you could play another boost card without boosting, and also swing Banksy. Those are, I think, the other synergy cards. But I agree, it's probably mostly a synergy piece, not something you're really looking to like pack one, pick one as like a signal card, right?
Yeah, definitely don't pick it early. That is a good point, especially MedX. That coming in for 4 is a break point that's usually going to hit, especially when you're max and not dash. So you probably don't have that many items. Like if you have several red MedXs, I think hyperdriver should go up in your pick order because when it's just a card for that 3 counters on a hyperdriver, just putting it in play from your hand. That's really powerful.
If you know you have it too, you can sit on the MedX until you draw the hyperdriver and play it from Arsenal. You kind of signal you have it, but also like 4 is a pretty tough break point. There's
so the main ways
one card in the set I think that blocks it.
No,
on its own.
There's quite a few ways to block 4. So the main one's red firewall. That's just always blocks 4. It's just the red defense card. You look at your top card. If it's an Evo, you keep it on top. Anything else, you put on
That's the one I was thinking of.
But there's also all the galvanized cards, which are going to be pretty. I think you're going to see a lot more of them in draft than in sealed because I think spoilers Dash is a lot better in draft than she is in sealed, and she likes the galvanized cards because some of her items chill out with 0 counters on them.
Yeah, good thing you brought those up too because we were almost about to finish Max and I wanted to talk about the galvanized cards because I think the galvanized cards are quite good in Max. Because you can't always make use of like a hyperdriver resource, being able to just convert that into functionally 1 block, even though it's actually 2 block. And being able to block the 4 break point is, I think, quite strong.
Yeah, I think if you have a good draft deck, a lot of the time you're going to be doing the hyperdriver synergy, so you aren't going to want to blow up your own hyperdrivers because you'll have ways to use them so often. But
that's fair.
It's definitely not never that you'll want to block with them. And then the one that says it has go again if an item you control has been destroyed this turn, that is so easy to enable in Max because you have so many hyperdrivers that just enter with 1 counter because they enter with 2 and you crank them to then you swing Banksy. So you have one counter on your hyperdriver. So you play your boost card, you break your hyperdriver, you get your resource, you can just attack 0 for 4, go again with that card. So I think that card will be
I'm pretty sure that card
very, very commonly played in Max.
Yeah, I think that card is called Soup Up, right? That's Soup Up. I am like
I,
90% sure.
I'm not sure because
Anyway,
there's one that has the galvanized text, and it's just the same card without the line of if an item you control is destroyed, this turn it gets go again. And I can't
yeah, that's
remember.
Infused Alloy.
Okay, then I
Infused
think
Alloy is that one. Soup Up is the rare, which adds the game go again if an item has been destroyed. Otherwise, they're identical.
okay. I think Soup Up will be very good. It's a card that will be a reasonable pull into Max as well.
Yeah. And when I'm talking about like Galvanize and Max, I'm not necessarily talking about like running a whole bunch of Galvanized cards. I think just running a couple, a bit like traps in Assassin. Although maybe you ran a lot of traps in
Oh
Assassin
yeah,
and Outsiders, but like I think it's just one of those things where it's just like a sprinkling is probably pretty good to just round you out a little bit. Since you may be running cards with lower defensive power in the pumps, um, some ability to block and make up for that maybe helps a little more. Um, yeah, I think that pretty much does sum it up. As Max in draft, do you think you can go more all out than in sealed, or do you still have to kind of be mindful? Are you doing a lot of the like single boost to turn on your ability so you can crank and swing Banksy, or are you boosting multiple times?
I think it really depends. I do think that the bigger boost cards are generally going to be better because you're getting like I'd rather be attacking with a big Bertha than a 0 to 50 because you're spending 2 cards a deck for 6 damage rather than 2 cards a deck for 3 damage. Um, I think because of the nature of the pump spells and you really wanting the pump spells and there being 4 different ones of them, I think it's going to be pretty common to go pump spell, boost attack, max Banksy as your play pattern. And because of that, you just won't be boosting multiple times in a turn that often. I could be wrong, and I did have several turns that I was boosting 2 times, but it seemed pretty uncommon that I was like boosting 3 or 4 times in a turn.
And how big was your deck in draft?
So I think I played 35 in the first round, and then I played 34 in the 2 rounds after that. And I don't know if that's correct. My final round, the game ended on turn 3, so uh,
I'll do.
so I'm not sure how many cards you're supposed to be playing in drafts. I have always been a pretty big advocate of just playing the minimum amount of cards you can, but when each card just means you can boost something an additional time, get an extra action point every card you add into your deck, it's sometimes worth diluting the power a little bit to make sure that your deck is functional because you're going to need a boost if you're playing max at least.
And
You're probably
like I
gonna,
said before, like with sealed, there's more block threes and the general power level is lower. When those two separate a little more, you can get a little more freedom with your deck space uh, to not just run like the maximum number of playables you can because you just need to have cards as a resource.
yeah. The other thing that I think changes, I guess it doesn't change a lot between draft and sealed, but it's worth talking about. I think Max really values like some of the blade break equipment because he isn't going to be doing the Evo upgrades. He just wants to race you most of the time. That having them to help basically hit your break points, and because you don't care if your slot gets destroyed because you probably weren't going to Evos upgrade it anyway. The blade break equipment's very good in Max and also in Dash, but we'll get to Dash in a second.
Well, I mean that sounds like a good enough segue for me. Do you want to go into Dash and then close out on Teclodad?
Yeah, sounds good. So
Awesome. So neither of us have played Dash, but you've seen a Dash in the finals. What do you think is the main strategy as Dash when you're going into a draft, or when you've decided in the draft that you're Dash? What are
yeah,
you looking for?
I'm not exactly sure what the biggest pulls into Dash are because none of the cards I look at, I'm like, man, that's a sick Dash card. But in my draft, I did see a lot of items going very late, like some of the blue items that I'm pretty happy to play in my Dash deck, like the blue script thing that returns.
The recovery or backup protocol,
Yeah,
right?
backup protocol.
Yeah, backup protocol.
I saw a blue of that going pretty late. I saw I guess boom grenades are probably the biggest pull into to Dash. The red boom grenades are very good.
Oh yeah.
But I think that Dash is kind of the hero that I'm most uncertain about because you want some of these items, you want the good ones, you want the red boom grenades, and then you want some boost cards. I also think Dash is probably going to want red hyperdrivers because she's good at playing items. Like she wants items, she wants to play items at the top. You're also charging your symbiosis shot when you play it from hand. And I think Dash is the deck that's going to be picking up the Medexes, Medex.
Medex and Expedite.
Yeah, picking those up the highest because she has items she wants to put in. So having those to get your hyperdriver into play, I think, is a pretty max thing to or Dash thing to do. Um, that said, I think Dash is the hardest hero to figure out, and she has some like kind of interesting stuff she can do with like the overpower script. And I am pretty. I usually am pretty low on evasion in formats. I think in a format as fatigue heavy as Bright Lights is, that might change. Where if people are just trying to fatigue you, then giving all your stuff overpower seems very interesting. But for the most part, your plan is going to be looking to erase people, looking to block a reasonable amount. You have a pretty solid weapon, and you don't need like a lot to be able to fatigue as Dash. You just need like one med kit, and suddenly you have fatiguing other dashes or maxes as a viable strategy. Where if you have a bunch of defensive items and you have some of these survival or this med kit to kind of loop to gain life and recharge your symbiosis shot, then you can threaten to fatigue anybody. So yeah,
You want
I
to
think
sort of explain that interaction,
yeah.
like how does that work?
So if you have a medkit in play, then you can activate it, spending your action point, gain 2 life. Then it goes back into your deck. And if there's no cards in your deck, then it'll be the top card of your deck. So then you can use Dash's ability and pitch another card to play it off the top. And as long as you can keep that and one other card, then you can gain 2 life every turn until your opponent runs out of cards if they aren't
You
quite
also
out of
get a
cards
pistol
yet.
counter, right?
And then
So
when it goes
you
into
can eventually
play,
just pistol them.
yeah, when it goes into play, your symbiosis shot gets a counter on it. So when they're out of cards, not doing anything, you just can spend each turn to just shoot the pistol or play the med kit, get another counter. Then next turn you can shoot the pistol, and eventually they'll die. And that was actually the strategy I used in the round 4 of my pre-release when I was playing Dash to fatigue the max.
For me, I think some of the marquee cards to look out for as Dash are maybe the good items, of course, are quite good, but I feel like they're going to be relatively uncontested because they're not something that Tekla Boston is maybe necessarily looking for or Max is necessarily looking for. So, like, I feel like it's pretty likely you might see like a Boom Grenade go late in pack one. Uh, but any of the items I think that you can play from hand and reasonably still get like full value out of will be good. But also items that you're happy to crank will be extra important, so that you can sort of build up your pistol counters, crank an item, get that extra action point, and sort of shoot twice or shoot multiple times with the extra action point that gives you. Um, as far as the items go, other than that, I think you're really looking for boost cards because you can always tell like whether or not like you should or shouldn't boost based on the card on top. Things like Firewall also seem pretty good. They're just good blocking cards because you're going to be running no blocks in your deck, so you want cards in your deck that you can play reasonably well defensively when needed. Do you think Evo cards are super important for Dash? Because I think some probably are.
So it's weird because there are some Evo cards that do nice things for you, like the one that I was talking about when we were talking about sealed, of like you draw a card and then put a card from your hand on top of your deck. Doing that and putting an item on top of your deck is very good, very strong because you're just going to play that item off the top with your dash ability. Um, I think for the most part you're not super looking to get items. I think there's a it's either a glove or a chest piece, the battery cell.
Yeah, the chess piece that you destroy the internet and you get a resource and you can. I don't remember exactly. I'd have to look it up.
I don't remember what it does, but I remember reading it and being like, this is a good card in Dash if I can get it in Dash. So definitely.
There's like that entire cycle.
The 0 cost 2 block blade break stuff.
Yeah, the yellow 2 blocks is what I'm calling it. Like
Yeah.
the yellow 2 block commons. It's like the headpiece which puts the thing on top and draws a card. What draws a card then puts the thing on top, even better. The gloves, which let you play an item from your hand of 0, 1, or cost at instant speed. I was using that to play the Ward 4 item in Tekla Boston and just turning that into a defense reaction, basically. And then the chest piece, like you said there. I don't remember what the boots do, but I think they were the most underwhelming of the four. But I think all of those are quite good in Dash if you can actually just put them into play, which you probably can because you get extra action points.
Yeah, though a lot of the time you have extra action points and you want to use them to shoot your gun, but
Mm.
you can just play the
You
item,
can
get
tank
it.
your gunshot and then play that, and the next turn you can shoot your gun twice. You know.
Sure, sure. And then playing the playing these evos, and then you get some value out of the activated ability. If you get like 2 points of value out of the activated ability, then you block for two with them later. That's 4 points out of a card and an action point. That's perfectly on rate. And then it can also like the ability I said get 2 points of value out of it, but you can definitely get more than that if you turn a hand that's like a complete clunker into a hand that's like doing pretty efficient things. So I I do think they are solid in dash, and I think yeah, I don't know. One thing that you were talking about boost, one of the advantages of boost also is when you're playing dash, you look at your top card of your deck every time your top card changes. By boosting away a top card that's not an item, it gets you one closer to finding an item. So it basically gives you more chances to find an item that you can play off the top, which is very powerful as well.
And I think the key takeaway with Dash is the thing you want to be doing is playing items off the top because that is so just above rate. Uh, Basically, if you play a boom grenade off the top, you can think of it as turning a card in your like a blue in your hand into 4 damage, an action point, and 2 resources,
And a
which is
counter
just
on your gun.
absolutely crazy. What was that?
And a counter on your gun.
Oh yeah, and a can on your gun. Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you convert that all into like if, the ephemeral math space of flesh and blood, that ends up
It's a lot.
being something. It's like 8 value for one card. It's actually insane. And so what you want are cards that enable you to do that as much as possible, but there's a balance because items don't block. So I think a lot of the solving with Dash is going to be what is the correct ratio of items to other cards that help me do the thing. Because otherwise, if you aren't doing the thing, you are just a lower HP hero that is worse than the other two.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, definitely want to be playing items at the top 100%. But yeah, if you're doing that consistently, dash is going to be very strong.
So we're coming up closer to an hour here. Let's go over Teklavasan and then we can close this out. So, Teklavasan, what are we looking
So
for?
I think Teklevasan is a little bit different from he is in sealed. I think the focus of draft isn't going to be as much on just fatiguing and having a 40 card deck or as many cards as possible. You really need to make sure you're able to survive these two heroes, Max and Dash. They're like high damage output. They're really efficient turns, and playing like random two blocks to get your deck up to 40 cards probably isn't going to be worth it. You probably want to just like make sure you're getting your evos online as quickly as possible so you can use at uh, your gun at a good rate where it has 3 evos or 4 evos where it gets really strong. Even 2 evos is fine. 1 for 2 without go again is just fine, but not amazing. But I think you want to play a thinner deck and kind of turbo towards getting your gun charged up. Maybe in the Teklevasan mirror you still play as many cards as you can, but I know I played in my draft. I played a game against Michael Fang, and he had a yellow no block in his hand, and he was playing like 37 or 38 cards. He was playing quite a few cards, and because he had a single yellow no block, it forced him to basically, in order to use his hand efficiently, he needed to take a bunch of damage and try to race me. And we had the classic situation where the defensive deck takes a bunch of damage to throw a bunch of damage back. And as the aggressive deck, I'm like, okay, I will block all the damage on this turn. I blocked with 3 cards, then Arsenal to pump spell. And then his next turn, he drew a hand that presented like 7 damage off its 4 cards. And that's something that happens a lot if you aren't able to use your cards defensively when you're a defensive focused deck. So basically, the key takeaway from that moment was you probably don't want to put the bad cards in your deck just to increase your deck count. You can play above 30, especially if all the cards are good, but I wouldn't be putting kind of worse cards in your deck just to fill it out in against Dash and Max, where you're probably just going to die if you're doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe going a little above is probably fine, especially if it's a card you're happy to run anyway. Uh, I haven't played a draft, but I would imagine the big things you're looking for are ways similar to Dash. The thing you want to be doing with Teklevasen is playing your Evos from Banish in a free sort of way, because that is similar to Dash, functionally like drawing a card. So um, you you probably are going to prioritize things that scrap a little more. You're probably going to prioritize the really good evos that are pretty efficient to play. I really think the yellow zero cost ones that Dash also wants are phenomenal in Teklevasen. Being able to put an Evo on top with the headpiece and then boost it away to then functionally just draw a card for a resource is very strong. Having the item one was perfectly serviceable for me, especially if you run one or two items in your deck that you're happy to run, like a boom grenade that you can flash in. Um, and then the steam counter one can be quite good as well to help smooth out some of your curves, because with the gun and the varying cost of attacks, you may be just like one resource shy of doing what you want to do, and one resource can go a long way, saving you a whole card in this format. Um, but yeah, I think the big thing, the two main things you want to do is you want to play your evos from Banish, and you want to get four set up as quickly as possible, because the best thing you can be doing as Teklevasen is swinging the gun for three go again every single turn, and you will probably beat most opponents if you can do that efficiently.
Yeah, especially if you can combine it with doing something else with those two remaining resources you have afterwards. So if like you like do that and then you play a 2 for 5 boost card, you just don't boost it because you don't need to, because you're gonna have go again and you're ending the turn with it. But that's like a 2 card 8. If you're doing something like that every turn, then that'll be, yeah. It's really hard for other heroes to keep up with that.
Yeah. Um, and then like if you do have the ability, I think the boost like big boost cards are probably quite good in Teklevasen, just because uh, early on you don't really need to spend extra resources, so being able to use as many resources as you can is very efficient. They work really well with the weapon at 2 for 5, as you said there, but also they're just good extenders to let you go wide. What do you think about the evos in general? What are some of the key ones you're going to be looking out for? I already mentioned like the 0 for 2 yellows again. I think those are going to be quite good for those, for both him and Dash. But what about like the Sentry set, the red
Is that the
two
red
block
battle worn
ones?
one? Yeah,
Yeah,
I
the red
think
battle worn
Tekla's
ones.
I think Tekla's the only hero that, of the three heroes that actually want the red battle worn ones, because they're pretty awkward to play out when they cost you 2 resources and a full card and an action point, where you're just getting 3 points of block kind of broken up over 2 turns. But Teklo loves those because you can play them, you can block with them twice, and then they're still sitting there to get upgraded if you draw another Evos or banish another Evos later. And they're also powering up your gun, even though you've already blocked with them. So you can kind of like, a lot of the time when you block with your Evos, that's cashing it in is going to break, but the battle worn one's going to stay around after you do that, which is perfect for Tekla. That's exactly what he wants, to power up his gun. And then we also haven't mentioned them yet, but there's a lot of the attacks that are really above rate once you have several Evos going.
I was going to bring that up next.
There's
The payoffs, so to speak.
yeah,
But most of them,
yeah.
they're all rares, I think. Yeah, they are all rares.
The one that is a four cost 6 power attack that gets its cost reduced by 1 for each Evo you have. If you have 3 Evos, it's pretty easy to 2 card fire the gun, attack with that for 6. That's again 2 card 8 with only 3 Evos, which is usually you can't two
Only
card
two,
8 with.
right? Because it costs two if you have two Evos.
Yeah, but the gun won't have go again
But I
unless
guess
you
you
get the
need to
third
go again.
Evos.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind. I figured it out.
At the same time.
Uh,
Then there's another one that's like a 3 for 9. It's 3 for 5 that gets +1 for each Evo you have. If you have 4 Evos, it's just you can 2 card 9. That's great. If you have 3 Evos, it's still Wounded Bull coming in for 8. Another great card.
I
And they
think that
block
might
3
be
if you don't have
actually.
Evos.
I think that might be one of the most common signal cards that like Tekla is open. Is if you get past a red or blue mechanical strength, both of those cards are nuts in this deck.
Yeah. Even the blue, if you have 4 Evos, you play it second cycle. It's just a 3 for 7, which is great.
Yeah, it's a 3 for 7 block 3 at blue. It's pretty nuts. Um, Junkyard Dog, I think, is another pretty good. Just I won't necessarily say like bread and butter, but it's a good role player card in him. It's just on rate and does what you want to do, where you can block with your evos and scrap them. And I think most of the other scrap cards can be a little awkward to use functionally.
Yeah,
But that one is like it's kind of fine because like you're just getting a card's worth of value out of it, all right. So
yeah. The zero cost ones with 3 power, that one of them gives you a resource, one of them lets you cast an Evo with flash. Those or cast as if it's an instant. Those two I think are definitely worse, but they're fine. You do just want ways to scrap your Evos after you block with them. So I'm not unhappy to round out my deck with them. And then there's also the 3 for 6 that scraps a card and you can put a Steam counter on something. You're almost never going to have something to put a Steam counter on, but it still blocks 3. It's still a 2 card 6, and scrapping an Evo is worth quite a bit sometimes. So I'm never unhappy to put that in my deck.
yeah, I'll also say that I think it's also a rare. The one that you scrap a card, it's also a 3 for 6 and it gets overpower.
Mhm.
That one's probably super relevant as well.
Yeah. And
As I said before,
what
like Gigawatt and Tackle of Awesome too, because you can go like gun and then Gigawatt of big attack, and it's just a lot of surprise damage.
Yeah. One thing to watch out for when you're playing Tech of Awesome, you talked about overpower. When your equipment is upgraded, they're still action cards, so you can't actually block with the equipment plus another action card from your hand on these overpower cards. So a lot of the time, you're really encouraged to save your equipment for as long as possible, but you do have to worry about getting punked out by overpower damage, even if you have like 5 block on armor. You just can't use it if it has overpower because your armor is actions or action
I
cards.
like that you said punked out because Max exists.
Yeah.
So he's getting you. Uh, yeah, and of course, I think all the heroes want boost cards. Tekla no different. Boost cards sometimes draw you cards in this hero, so it's nuts. Firewall is probably at its best home here as well, because if you have a boost card and you block with a Firewall and you see an Evo on top, you're zooming. And if there's not an Evo on top, then it gives you a chance to see an Evo on top because you get a reroll.
Mhm. I do like it quite a bit in Dash as well, because she can, if she has an item on top, she can just play it on your opponent's turn and then block with the Firewall. And if she doesn't have an item on top, Firewall helps you dig towards those items. So, but yeah, great
The
in
awkward part
Tekla,
with
great in
Dash is
Dash.
Yeah, I was the awkward part with doing it in Dash is that you have to pay for the item on your opponent's turn, so you are pitching a card on your opponent's turn to do that. But could definitely be right, especially if your opponent is playing Tekla Boston or they have a bad turn, and you just can get value out of your card that way. All right, so with that out of the way, Michael, I want to close out this entire discussion and probably this whole entire episode with asking you for what are your preliminary thoughts on the draft. Having completed one whole draft, I'm now asking you to judge the entire work that the developers have put into this and give them a grade. How do you feel about Bright Light's draft?
Yeah. So now that I'm an expert with one whole draft under my belt, I,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that this format, it does seem pretty good. I think all 3 heroes have a lot of interesting decisions and are relatively deep. I think the games so far, again, I haven't played that many of them, but they have all felt like there have been interesting decisions on both sides. I've seen kind of the impacts of playing a smaller deck coming back to bite you as you run out of cards and get fatigued, playing a bigger deck kind of coming back to bite you as you have to put these mopey bad cards in your deck, and sometimes that hurts a lot. So I I think this format's going to end up being pretty good. I do like that you can pivot between the heroes a lot easier than you can in other formats because they're all mechanologists. So even though your boom grenades might be a lot worse in Max than they were if you were Dash, if Max just ends up wide open, you can make it work, you know?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, the pivoting I think is actually kind of huge. I'm not saying that like pivoting has ever been great in Fab, but I think it's definitely a lot better in this set where you can. It seems like a lot of cards can find homes in like two or if not all three heroes, and I think that's a huge boost. Boom Grenade in particular, I think all three heroes can justify playing that card. Um, and like a lot of the evos that are like generically good, we talked about the yellow ones that block two quite a bit. And boost cards obviously go in just about every hero. So I think it's pretty reasonable to stay open, kind of see what might really come around. And if you see one of those really flagship cards for a hero, you have a good idea that you're probably not going to be contested. You can then kind of move into that a little more. Um, so I have a lot of hopes. And then, like, hey, if you move into a hero and you train wreck a little bit and you realize that you're super contested, you can move out pretty easily as well. Like, you didn't just throw away like 8 picks of your draft to nothing. like they're playable cards.
Yeah.
So I think that's absolutely going to be huge. Based on what I've seen, it seems like all the heroes will probably be viable to some degree. I don't know exactly where Teklebossin will lie in relative to the others, just because the two drafts I have seen and talked to people about were for Teklebossin pods. But it does seem entirely likely that if you're a one of two max or a one of two dash, that your deck is going to be quite good, which is good to see to start for the health for the of the format. Uh, and so
Mhm.
I think all those things considered, this could be an absolute one of the best draft experiences that this game has had so far. And I'm really excited to see what happens at Worlds. And I'm hoping they do uh, a more personalized coverage so that we can follow a player from start to finish through the draft. I think that'll be really exciting.
Yeah, I hope they do that too. I think that's just like just a limited viewing experience has always been like kind of rough when you're like jumping between games of decks that you don't really know. I think like having one cohesive story where you watch one player draft and you watch their 3 rounds, I think that leads to a really good experience. And even like if you look at random like streams or YouTube videos of people doing drafts and stuff, like people really rally behind watching one player like record their whole experience. And I think that taking that for like the big stage and doing that for coverage of worlds, I think would be very popular. Regardless of how this draft format ends up, I really like that LSS is experimenting with kind of different formats and trying different things. I think Flesh and Blood, there's so many different things they could do. They don't need to have like every set be like Welcome to Wraith. Like I love Welcome to Wraith. I think it's a really good set to both play Sealed and draft with. But I think like them branching out, them trying different things leads to both a diverse experience where like drafting one set feels significantly different than drafting another set. Like drafting Bright Lights doesn't feel like drafting Outsiders or drafting Uprising or drafting Tales of Aria. It feels very different where everyone's a mech doing mech things. And also, I think like if they keep doing this, if they keep trying different things, they're gonna find something that's amazing. They're gonna stumble upon. Well, I shouldn't say stumble. They're like they're putting a lot of time and effort into it, but eventually they're gonna like create some really really cool formats. And this might be one. I don't know. I haven't played enough to really know yet, but I think it's a very good sign and that they are trying all these different things, and it means we'll have great things in the future, and that gets me excited.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the future is bright.
Yes, the future is bright.
Excellent.
After that, do you have any closing thoughts, Travis?
I was going to ask you the same thing. I feel like we've comprehensively covered everything that we set out to. Thank you for bringing me on. I'm glad to help keep this thing going and help in any way I can. I wish Roger all the best with everything he's got going on, and looking forward to next time we see each other at an event.
Yeah, hopefully soon. All right.
Hopefully
Thanks for hopping
soon.
on here, Travis. It was great talking to you, and yeah, I'm ready to wrap things up.
All right. Well, that said, next time you're at a Bright Light limited event, remember to mind your manners. Take care, everyone.
MNR.